Hello and welcome to yet another episode of the Yellow Gloves podcast, your one-stop shop for all things Cage Warriors. I'm your host, Chris, and today we're going to be breaking down and recapping all things Cage Warriors 169, which took place at the Indigo in London on Saturday night. Crazy bunch of fights, crazy finishes, some real good storylines here, some mega prospects getting bled through. But I guess we'll start where we always do with the main event, and that was between Jordan Vucenic, former featherweight champion, and Simone D'Anna. So this fight was a pretty interesting one coming into it. Jordan Vucenic obviously needs no introduction. Like I said, former featherweight champ, lost his belt to Paul Hughes in 2022, which was a potentially career-altering beatdown. Paul Hughes really put it on Jordan Vucenic. But since then, he's bounced back with 2 wins on the trot in 2023, both via second round rear naked choke. And actually, coming into this fight, his last 3 wins had been via second round rear naked choke. Simone D'Anna riding a 3-fight win streak coming into this as well. Won last year in his Cage Warriors debut versus Albert Diaz, who's a pretty fun featherweight stroke lightweight. And also Simone D'Anna, interestingly, has a win over Tom Creasey, who's also on this card, which we'll talk about him later. But it's so good to see Jordan Vucenic in action, as always. One of the best walkouts in the game, one of the nicest blokes, and an incredible fighter as well, which just makes it all the easier to root for him. Simone D'Anna came into this fight, I would say, a pretty sizable underdog. I don't really look at betting lines and all of that, but I would imagine he came into this as a sizable underdog, and Jordan Vucenic treated him as such. Lovely in round one, just that short elbow to the bridge of the nose from Jordan Vucenic, dipping under the strike that D'Anna was throwing, and then just going in there with a short elbow. It was so quick. Maybe there'd been a bit of a head clash. I couldn't quite tell what had cut Simone D'Anna up until we'd seen a replay. But D'Anna was getting pieced up early, left jab landing at ease for Vucenic, and he pumps that thing out so regularly and so well. It just really, disrupted anything that D'Anna was planning to do, disrupted his rhythm. Flying knee from Vucenic and the elbow both landed in round one. D'Anna was eating a lot of damage in this, I felt. Vucenic doing brilliantly to slip a lot of the strikes that D'Anna was throwing, and when slipping was striking with the slip, which is how he got that that elbow that I spoke about just a minute ago, the short elbow to the bridge of the nose. He was just doing brilliant, just evading so many strikes from D'Anna. And like I said, if you're going to dip and you're going to move, especially in MMA, putting something behind it is one of the best things you can do. Like you can get so many great combinations off a feint, off a slip. And look, Jordan Vucenic was dealing it out to D'Anna in that first round. D'Anna had a nice left high kick in this, and I think he's got a brilliant high kick because there's very little telegraph on it, and it's quite clean. But Vucenic just closed the distance as that head kick came in, smothered him against the fence, managed to peel him off with a single leg and dragged him to the ground, but couldn't do much with it. And the first round ended, scored it a pretty clear 10-9 to Vucenic. I think once he got that single leg and once he managed to get D'Anna down with relative ease, I think he realised what his method for victory was. And in the second round, that's exactly what we saw. First action from Vucenic, goes deep on a double leg against the fence, and got D'Anna down practically the entire round to play with. Anyone who's listened to this pod for the last year and a half knows one thing, and that's that I always talk up Jordan Vucenic. I think he's one of the best back takers in MMA. I had someone reach out to me once saying, "Don't you mean in Cage Warriors? One of the best back takers in Cage Warriors?" No, genuinely one of the best back takers in MMA, one of the best operators on the ground when it comes to just looking for the finish and just being able to manipulate positions on the ground and get himself onto someone's back. I wouldn't say he's the flashiest grappler. I wouldn't say he's the best grappler, but in terms of taking your back, there's very few in MMA that I rate higher than Jordan Vucenic. And funnily enough, it wasn't even the back take really that got Jordan Vucenic to finish. A lot of time here in side control or in half guard even, elbowing away at the glutes and the ribs of D'Anna, just chipping away at him, and was looking for that far side Kimura. And it was very evident that he was looking for it. But what I loved was that At one point, D'Anna managed to build to his knees. Vucenic attacked the neck and just pushed him back down, switched off the single leg and managed to drag him to the mat, which was really nice. And yeah, I mean, I loved the work that he was doing on that far side Kimura, isolated the arm of D'Anna, then started posturing up and firing away elbows, just a left elbow. And if you've grappled, or if you follow grappling religiously, or you're just really interested in grappling, you'll know exactly what Vucenic was doing, and it was just a tale as old as time, really, of deceit on the ground. Made D'Anna forget all about the Kimura, while he still had his hand controlling the wrist of D'Anna, which was amazing. But like I said, postured up, left elbow, left elbow, left elbow. It's MMA at the end of the day. If it was jiu-jitsu and they were just simply grappling, maybe D'Anna just stays conscious of the Kimura. But Jordan Vucenic, elbows, disguises it all. D'Anna's just, trying to cover up, forgets that guy's still controlling his wrist. And in that moment, Jordan Vucenic switches, gets his far side Kimura, tucks the arm under the back of D'Anna. It was just nasty. D'Anna had to tap immediately or that thing was going to snap. Jordan Vucenic is a magician on the ground. Another second round submission. His last 4 wins via second round submission, and 3 wins in a row since that humbling to Paul Hughes. 12-2 now. I tweeted it after the fight, but UFC just needs to pull their fingers out, in my opinion. If Paul Hughes wins this weekend, coming up in Dublin, and Vucenic has won here, pull their fingers out and just sign both of them to the UFC. They're 2 of the best fighters in Europe. Forget Cage Warriors, forget anything. They are 2 of the best 145ers in Europe, and 2 of the best fighters in Europe, period. So I think they both deserve the shot. I don't think Vucenic will stick around long enough to get his belt back. And I do envision Paul Hughes and Vucenic getting the call very soon. I fear that Vucenic might have to go the Contender Series route, which is really jarring. Whereas I think Paul Hughes might just be able to sneak into like that Paris card later in the year, or even the Manchester card with a win in Dublin, because he just can't be ignored. And I feel like, we're talking about Vucenic and we're talking about Paul Hughes. I think these 2 are just going to be intrinsically linked for the longest time. Wouldn't be surprised if one day we see a trilogy fight in the UFC. I've been clamoring for that for a while. I think it makes so much sense. But for Jordan Vucenic, tremendous performance. Again, Simone D'Anna really just got absolutely dominated in this fight. And yeah, props to Jordan Vucenic. Will we see him again in Cage Warriors? I don't know. I hope not. From a non-selfish perspective, I really hope he gets the UFC call up. But would I love to talk about Vucenic on this pod again? Absolutely. I guess we'll see what happens in the future. And speaking of the future, we had in the co-main event, Lona Kavanagh versus Shawn Da Silva. Lona Kavanagh needs no introduction, I think. 5-0 as a pro coming into this fight, with multiple stunning finishes in his portfolio. And I think what plays really well for Kavanagh is, he's pretty well known in the MMA Twitter circle. I think he's like a really beloved prospect from people that don't really follow Cage Warriors too heavily, but they are invested because of him. Mega prospect at 125 pounds, training partner of Tom Hardy as well. And you always see Tom Hardy shouting out Lona Kavanagh, which is cool to see. And just, I think the crown jewel of GB Top Team, in my opinion. Obviously, I think Nathaniel Wood's, far gone from being that crown jewel. I think he's just like top dog, in my opinion. Nathaniel Wood, I think Lona Kavanagh's the next one up. Coming into this fight, I thought it was going to be a real tough one for him. Shawn Da Silva, 6-0. So that you had 2 undefeated prospects coming up against each other. Incredible matchmaking, ballsy matchmaking from Cage Warriors, having 2 undefeated prospects, 2 big prospects at 125. And yeah, on Shawn Da Silva, I've said this before, the guy's a massive laugh. He's incredibly funny, always joking around, messing around in the cage, dancing and everything. But don't like misconstrue his fun persona for not being like a crafty operator in the cage, because he really is. And if you saw his fight with Gerardo Fanny last year, who's one of the best flyweights in Europe, Shawn Da Silva just beat him handily. And prior to that, obviously, Shawn Da Silva made his Cage Warriors debut and got a knockout over a then 9-1 Kiru Sahota. So Shawn Da Silva, new in the yellow gloves, fairly new name for us all, but he's been putting in the work and he's been impressing. This fight, though, was so much fun, like genuinely so much fun. Probably the fight of the night, although I do think there was one fight that had a round in particular that for me was like the highlight of the whole card. But so much to unpack here and talk about, and I don't want to run too long on this episode, but I think this fight needs to be spoken about. Kavanagh in the first round, just unbelievable, man. Like sticking the jab early, spins Da Silva with a laser quick right hook. Listen, Da Silva is fast. Lona Kavanagh made him look a bit slow in this fight. Like and not slow in terms of his offense. I think offensively, Shaun Da Silva looked as fast as ever. But when you saw the way that Lona Kavanagh was hitting and then evading and moving, and Shaun Da Silva just couldn't put hands on him for a long portion of this fight, and he managed to later on in the fight. But Lona Kavanagh is, I don't know, guys, like hits hard for a 125er, and he's 125ers are quick. That's the whole point of the weight class. But Lona Kavanagh is like really, really quick and explosive. He's reminds me a bit of John Dodson. Like in all honesty, reminds me of John Dodson, like a more athletic. John Dodson was wildly athletic actually, so that's probably not a fair thing to say, but just I guess a better built John Dodson, someone who's just he's just an insane fighter is Lona Kavanagh. And I think that's the best comp you can make is the John Dodson one. Lona Kavanagh in that round, straight right hand clipped Da Silva, dropped him with a left. Da Silva recovered so quickly after getting dropped with the left. Kavanagh was doubling up on the left hook. I mean, he was landing whatever the hell he wanted to land in that first round. Da Silva had a nice elbow off the collar tie, but again, Kavanagh left hook dropped him 3 times in that round. 3 times. Granted, one of them, Da Silva just dropped to his knee, but still a knockdown. I don't know how Da Silva recovered every single time, but he did. And the fact that this fight went the full 15 is really surprising after how that first round was playing out. Immense round for Lona Kavanagh. I scored it 10-9. A lot of people scored it 10-8. And maybe in retrospect, it probably is close to a 10-8. But I felt Shaun Da Silva was in the fight throughout. Like he did get dropped, but they were flash knockdowns. He was getting up. He wasn't getting the piss beaten out of him, I don't think. But like I said, whatever Lona Kavanagh wanted to throw, he was landing. Then in the second round, and then early in the second round, like the left hook was still landing for Kavanagh. Da Silva clinching against the fence, which was, he started to see some success in the clinch, which once he managed to land something good in there, which was a couple of nice short hooks in the collar tie, he just wanted to play there and he wanted to just keep going in there. And that's where Shaun Da Silva had success in the second round. Big knees to the body from Da Silva off the collar tie. All the great work he did in this fight was from that collar tie, from the clinch position. It just took him far too long and he was far too inconsistent in getting to those positions. And the reason why was because Lona Kavanagh was just so bloody quick and so evasive that you just can't pin him like that. Like if you're going to, Shaun Da Silva got a couple of collar ties off, got some good strikes in, but unless you put him away in those positions, he's not going to be someone you can handily dominate there. Short elbow from Kavanagh was probably his highlight of the round. Great adjustment to Da Silva seeking the collar ties and close range entries. His corner, GB top team, amazing all night. Went 4-0 on the night, and I'm sure we'll talk about them throughout this episode. But he had Brad Pickett in the corner, and you could hear him asking for Kavanagh to throw like some short shots whenever Da Silva would try and get into that clinch range. And that was a really nice strike. That short elbow from Kavanagh had the slam takedown on Da Silva late into the round, and Da Silva was elbowing off his back. I thought Da Silva took that round. I had it 19-19 going into round 3. Again, how much leverage you want to give that? If you think Kavanagh scored a 10-8, then obviously the second round not as much of a success for Da Silva. In round 3, it was once again a Lona Kavanagh round, very clearly. Da Silva did have a nice jab, and then went into the oblique kick, calf kick, like back to back, just threw both of them within like a split second, which was nice. But Kavanagh got the takedown in with 4 minutes left of the fight, snatched the back of Da Silva, body triangle locked in, tried to go across the jaw multiple times and apply pressure, but Da Silva was really never going to tap. Escaped the back position so well, did Da Silva. Fought the hands, I think, just good savvy defensive grappling on the mat. And Kavanagh, with 2 minutes to go, managed to get him down again. and flattened Da Silva out. I thought he was going to go and get the rear naked choke. I think he went palm to palm on the rear naked choke, and I thought that was going to be it with little left of the round. But Da Silva survived. Just a tremendous fight as advertised. I scored it 29-28 to Kavanagh. Thought he dominated the third round. Improves to 6-0 now with a huge win over one of Europe's most exciting flyweights in Shawn Da Silva. One of those fighters where I think the UFC will come knocking before he even gets the chance at winning gold in Cage Warriors. He should obviously be the next in line, absolutely. And I would love to see him versus Shadj. I think it would be such a sick fight. Will it happen? I don't know, but I'd love it. I mean, Shadj's boxing versus Honor Kavanagh's boxing, the technique versus the speed. I mean, I'd be all over that fight, but I think the UFC come knocking. I think Kavanagh, you will probably get him on a contender series or something like that very, very soon, probably in this next season, this year. I think Kavanagh will probably get called up. Just UFC always looking to pad out now that 125 division. And Kavanagh's one of the most exciting in Europe. It's a no-brainer. He's young, he's incredibly gifted, and I think he's marketable as well. Just yeah, one of the best guys we've got here in the UK, I think. So we then had at middleweight Leon Aliou versus Will Currie. Leon Aliou coming off a win over Alan Carlos back in October. And, for all of, some people might be listening to this, don't quite know who Aliou is, has a win over James Webb, knockout win in Cage Warriors as well. James Webb, obviously former champion. And fun fact about Leon Aliou, did fight on Dana White's Contender Series, lost that fight to Bruno Ferreira, I think it was, Brazilian. And yeah, he's trying to get back-to-back successive wins, I think, is Leon Aliou's plan here at middleweight. But Will Currie, one half of one of my favourite fights of 2023, which was that razor-close decision loss to Mick Stanton for the middleweight title. 2 wins on the trot since that point, both via finish, and looking to head right back to gold. And all it took was 5 minutes for Will Currie to do that in this fight. Currie had the wide stance early, which can only ever mean one thing, roundhouse to the body, then went upstairs with a kick. Aliou fighting the hands of Currie, which I thought was interesting, and I think Currie wanted him to do so, because every time that Aliou would just reach out for the hands of Currie would just smash him with a roundhouse to the body, double leg, just automatic early on, and we know that Currie does his best work when he's on the ground. Just an absolute demolition man on the ground he is. Nice elbow to the side of the head. I think got a bit overconfident and lost the back position. Aliou went for the neck, jumped Gilly, which, to be honest, looked quite tight, but Currie defended smartly, yanked his head out and went straight into mount. And when Currie's in mount, there are very few middleweights at this level especially that aren't just going to fold. And that's what it was really. Currie started firing away at Aliou with big strikes and elbows and some really gnarly elbows in there. Aliou just bleeding all over the mat. Currie flattened him out, just kept elbowing away at him. I thought the fight could have been stopped, in all honesty, but we headed into what we thought was going to be the second round with Currie with a borderline 10-8 round in the first. It was just textbook Will Currie, total domination, a few seconds away probably from getting the finish, although, like I said, I do think it could have been stopped. But in between rounds, the referee just calls the fight. Obviously, to us watching the broadcast, I wasn't at the event, but obviously to us watching the broadcast, it was unclear if it had been like the corner had stopped it or Aliou had stopped it. We knew it wasn't a doctor stoppage. We knew that the ref hadn't made a decision on behalf of the fighter, but it just, we saw, I think Goddard was the ref for this potentially. We saw Goddard wave it off, and I thought that perhaps the corner had thrown in the towel. But when you look at the replay, Leon Aliou immediately walks back to his corner, shaking his head, and just felt like he was basically saying he doesn't want to fight anymore, which is very rare in MMA, and I think more fighters should do it. I know there's a whole like going out on your shield thing, and that's what we love to see, and that's what we praise. But sometimes you just need to be honest with yourself and save yourself the damage. I know it's a polarizing thing, and I know people are going to have different opinions. I think it should be not encouraged, but I do think that we shouldn't lump on fighters that do it. If you know that you're not going to get anything out of the fight, you're getting handily whooped. Save yourself the damage to fight another day. And I think props to Leon Aliou went in there, but Will Currie just beat the brakes off him. 12-3 now is Will Currie. He's looked tremendous since that loss to Mick Stanton. 3 wins in a row, all finishes. I think another crack at gold is imminent for Will. Speaking of guys on big win streaks, Darren Stewart fought Carlos Pereira here at catch weight, 195 pounds. Stewart riding a 4-fight win streak coming into this. He's been dominating his opponents on the ground. There's been a lot of memes of Darren Stewart with the Dagestani beard and Darren Gomedov all over social. It's a nickname that's been going around. I personally would love to see him fight better opposition coming into this. I loved the fights of Aliyu and Bonner. I think those are the people he should be fighting. But this trend of Darren Stewart fighting these old fighters, I thought was just a waste of Darren Stewart, in all honesty. I think he deserved to be fighting better caliber opposition. But what the hell do I know? Carlos Pereira, his opponent, a few days away from turning 45, a 53-fight pro, 39, 12 and 1, 24 finishes, or 33 finishes. So 33 of his 39 wins via finish, and I think it's 24 of those via knockout. I think most famously fought Michel Pereira of UFC fame, and that fight ended in just the way that a Michel Pereira fight can end. Ended as a no contest due to the cage break-in, which is always funny. But in regards to this fight, just a big shock. I mean, you'll probably listen to this. You've probably watched the fight. Carlos Pereira, like I said, turns 45 in a few days, wins via right hook KO in round 2. And in both rounds, Darren Stewart had him dead to rights, and he just rushed. I felt Stewart clipped him in round 1, rushed him against the fence, and Pereira caught him with something nasty. I think it was a right hand to the temple. Pereira tried to take the back and lock in the neck crank, but just ended up spending the whole round with Darren Stewart's back. A clear 10-9 to Carlos Pereira, which is something I didn't even foresee, talking about and writing about at the time when it was happening. I thought he was going to treat Carlos Pereira like the 44-year-old man that he is, and Carlos Pereira said, fuck that. Darren Stewart again in round 2, hurts Pereira against the fence, rushes him, gets overconfident. Like I said, Pereira slumps him with a right hook from hell. Carlos Pereira with the underdog win of the night. I think he would have been the biggest betting underdog. He should have been the biggest betting underdog coming into this. 53 pro fights, 40 wins, and a lot of finishes. Knocks out a UFC veteran in Darren Stewart, who, since returning to Cage Warriors, has gone 4-2. Lost to Mick Stanton in his first fight back, and obviously lost this one. It's a shame to see him lose at this point, because Darren Stewart's always fun. He's always good for a finish. But it does feel like the steam is running out for Darren Stewart. I hate to write eulogies for guys who have absolute veterans of the game. And Darren Stewart's, God, he's been in Cage Warriors since an amateur, and he's done great things, and 14-fight UFC vet. I mean, he's done it all. But I had a question from Jack Wannon, who listens to the pod and I'm very fond of. Jack said, what do you do with Darren Stewart after that loss? Am I being dramatic to think that set him back quite a bit? I don't think it's dramatic at all. Darren Stewart's been good fun, and he's always going to be good fun. I think these are the only fights you can book him in now. Like I've been saying, I want to see him more against the Aliyus and the Bonners. But I think these are the fights that he probably feels most excited about, guys that he knows he can probably go in there with and just scrap with. How does that bode for Darren Stewart getting knocked out by a 44-year-old, really someone with no name really in the scene, has had a lot of fights, and I'm not incredibly familiar with him. 53 pro fights, and I'd only heard about him when this fight was booked, so not really going to sit here and try and disguise that as anything other than a partial disaster, I think, for Darren Stewart. I think he was on the cusp of probably fighting for gold during this year. Like, I really think he could have snuck in there at 185 pounds, but I don't know. I think Darren Stewart is kind of permanently stuck now, in my opinion, floating in that 185, 205 catch weight fights against older opposition, against people who are susceptible to getting finished. But in terms of Darren Stewart, the competitor, and Darren Stewart aiming for big things within the organization, I think that boat has sailed, which is sad to say, but every career has an eventual slump. It's just the nature of the sport that we follow. I think Darren Stewart he'll be back and he'll have another fight and it'll be the same thing. Like he's going to go in there, he's going to finish a couple of people, and then he's probably going to get finished or dominated on the ground. He does look slower. He does look noticeably a bit older as well in the way that he's approaching his fights. But we're talking a lot about Darren Stewart, and I just want to, again, lump some praise on Carlos Pereira, because how many times do we see a guy in his 40s enter the cage and just get absolutely battered? But he's gone in there and added yet another win to his an incredibly long career. If anything, will we see him again in Cage Warriors? I don't know. We tend to see these. They sign for one fight really. They come in as warm bodies. These Brazilians, these older Brazilians, come in as warm bodies. But in the last two cards, we've seen these again old Brazilians who people might not hold in such high regard, come out with two of the biggest underdog wins of their respective cards. So props to Carlos Pereira, a very, very impressive finish for him. Our main card opener was between Ollie Santillati and Jamie Richardson at welterweight. Santillati with his second appearance in the Yellow Gloves, coming off a loss to James Sheehan back in October last year. Jamie Richardson needs no introduction, one of the OG Cage Warriors gunslingers. His fight with Phil Wells, the second fight, an all-time great Cage Warriors fight. Never in a dull one, this guy, kill or be killed. I think he's 11-9 coming into this fight. It's just that kind of guy is just going to go in there and just scrap with people. And whether he wins or loses, it's always going to be fun. Can't remember the last time he was in a dull one. Although last win in 2021 has only had two fights since, but lost both. But top opposition again in James Sheehan and Justin Burlinson. So both fighters with a common opponent in Sheehan and with a result in common as well, which is a loss to the Irishman. Unfortunately, even though I spoke a big game about this fight and I thought it was going to be the fight of the night, it really just wasn't much of that. Ollie Santillati just put an absolute lid on Jamie Richardson, took the path of least resistance and exposed it, right? Like, saw that he could get Richardson to the ground and did basically that. Not a tremendous amount to talk about here, guys. I scored it 30-27 to the man from Finland. Santillati, always good fun, but I think he took the path that he knew could get him a win. Smart and measured performance. If you're going to fight Jamie Richardson, you probably don't want to sit there and exchange in the pocket with him. We expected fireworks. We didn't get it. But a good dominant performance and a dominant decision win, and a first win in the Yellow Gloves for Ollie Santillati. So credit to him. Jamie Richardson, I'm sure we'll see him again. I think this guy's going to fight until the wheels come off, and he's always going to be in fun ones. But this one was just a rare snooze for both guys, like a real dull fight, in all honesty. But again, 30-27 Santillati. What more can you ask for? Gets his hand raised and first win in the Yellow Gloves. So we swiftly move on to the prelims, where we saw a lot of finishes and we saw a lot of great fights. We'll start with the prelim headliner, which was Dimitri Solimes versus Thomas Paul. Solimes making his Cage Warriors debut. 6-4 as a pro, coming off a loss in PFL, but 6'1" at 145 pounds is a pretty terrifying prospect. And Thomas Paul, his opponent, makes his Cage Warriors debut, which has taken a long time. Thomas Paul, almost a 20-fight pro from the UK. Thought it would have happened for him sooner. Most known, obviously, for being a deaf fighter, and as mentioned on the broadcast, like profoundly deaf, as in he literally cannot hear anything. A lot of people will know him from being the deaf guy who was on Dana White's Contender Series. Anyone who's followed the UK scene knows him more as being champ and having champ status here in the UK. And Thomas Paul has been doing his thing for a while. But great to see him in Cage Warriors, grinding in the UK scene. Very happy for him with this performance. Again, not an incredibly interesting fight, I don't think. I scored it 29-28 to Thomas Paul. I thought he dominated from round 2 and round 3 on the ground, in the clinch, all of the grappling positions Thomas Paul dominated, and that's what won him the fight. In round 1, he really struggled. 6'1" versus 5'7", a very obvious size discrepancy. And Dimitri Solimes was pumping out that jab and messing Paul up with it. I felt a lot of his straight shots were just landing. But once Thomas Paul realized he could weirdly kind of hook his way into close range, obviously Solimes isn't like this world beater, and he used his range well, but he was susceptible to getting closed down. And Thomas Paul was basically double hook entering into close range, and from there wrestling and grappling his ass off. Um, I tweeted during the fight. I said, no matter what happens in this fight, I've got pure chills watching Paul's corner sign towards him for the takedown and the rear naked choke attempt. And just to build off on that, like, it's such a unique relationship between fighter and coaches in general, right? And it's quite a lonely sport, and we always read about and hear about and we know about, and anyone who's practiced MMA or has practiced any martial art, you know just how lonely it can be. And I can't imagine for someone who is obviously deaf, not being able to hear any instructions and still being a winning fighter, having almost 20 professional fights, winning belts at a regional level, fighting in front of a lot of eyes in Contender Series. Like, I genuinely, there was a moment through this fight where I stopped watching for like the technical stuff, and I was just in pure awe of Thomas Paul. Um, and just, yeah, seeing the corner signing for the takedown, and I was saying to someone who I was watching the fights with, like, there's no gym for deaf fighters. There's no gym for, partial hearing fighters. Like, you go to a gym and you have coaches who may never have dealt with a deaf fighter, but they adapt. And I just wanted to shout out Thomas Paul's corner, and Thomas Paul as well. Yeah, like a very, maybe I'm getting a bit long in the tooth and a bit old and emotional, but just a really touching performance I felt from Thomas Paul. I've watched him fight many times before, but really kind of observing the fight and taking notes, that really got to me. So Thomas Paul improves to 12-5. I scored it 29-28 for him. It was a really tough round, that third one, to score. And I wouldn't have begrudged if someone had given Solimace rounds 1 and 3. But I think Paul just did enough on the ground to really just secure the victory. I'm sure we'll see him again in there at some point. And I hope he's treated as more than just a gimmick, more than just like a guy you can promote. And he really is a good fighter. So, yeah, excited to see Thomas Paul in there again, and hopefully quite soon. And now we get to I would say, the really fun part of the prelims, and we'll work our way down from the next fight, which is Jimmy Quinn versus Johan Salvador, all the way down to Jawany Scott versus John Matos. A lot of finishes and just an insanely fun set of prelims. So talking about Jimmy Quinn, Johan Salvador, Jimmy Quinn coming off a loss back in November to Tom Wright when it felt like really the sky was the limit for him. And why was the sky the limit for him? Because he did the unthinkable and had one of the greatest debuts of all time in July last year when he scored the fastest knockout in Cage Warriors history in 10 seconds. So it was always going to be an uphill battle for Jimmy Quinn to impress more than that. And obviously he dropped that fight to Tom Wright. Johan Salvador coming off a big underdog win over young Yoga Prabowo back in November. That was his first appearance in the Yellow Gloves. Does have a negative record, but was riding a win streak coming into this fight. Jimmy Quinn in round 1 was landing a lot of great singular shots. Right hand, spinning back fist, making a good connection on these strikes. A big knee in there from Quinn. But it was all singular shots. There was a gorgeous elbow to split the guard. It was probably my favourite strike of the round. But I tweeted about this during the fight, and this isn't in any way to disparage Jimmy Quinn. And if you've listened to the pod, I'm a big fan. So it's I feel like I can say this, but I think the worst thing that could have happened for Jimmy Quinn is that 10-second knockout. I watched Quinn in the amateurs. He's not a guy that just throws singular shots and hopes that something lands and finishes his opponent. He's a devastating striker, but he's devastating in combination as well. And where I'm starting to get a little bit concerned, and hopefully this fight has shook off the cobwebs a bit. I think getting that one hitter quitter as his debut, he's not really, now watching him fight, he's really just hunting the finish, hunting that, or chasing that high, I imagine. And he's a young fighter and he's still early in his career, so it makes sense to see this. But I really hope that his corner and his coaching staff, they are more kind of cognizant of the fact that this guy's really fast. He's hits hard for 135, has always fought well and struck well in combination. Let's get him striking in combination again. A lot of singular shots from Jimmy Quinn. And, don't get me wrong, could have well finished Johan Salvador in the first round of some of the shit he was landing. Salvador obviously savvy enough and did survive enough to, not get slept in the first round. But I'm talking about Jimmy Quinn as if he lost in round two. We'll get straight to it 'cause it didn't last very long. Johan Salvador shot for a takedown. If you know anything about Jimmy Quinn, he's got a really tight guillotine, attacks the neck beautifully. That's what he does here. Locks it in with ridiculous speed and precision and draws the tap out of his opponent. Quinn back in the win column in a big way, improves to 2-1. I think he's a really fun prospect at 135 pounds. And if you see him, you go back and watch his amateur fights, see this guy striking combination. Yeah, you'll know this is a mega prospect in my opinion. So 2-1 Jimmy Quinn. Sure, we'll see him again very soon. Didn't take any damage in this fight, and I'm sure we'll see an even more refined and improved Jimmy Quinn as well in the future. Our next fight was at middleweight, and it was between Mitchell Goode and Angus Hewitt. Angus Hewitt, former Cage Warriors champion in the academy scene, same as Mitchell Goode. Angus Hewitt, pure violence as a pro, kill or be killed. 1 or 2, all fights in Cage Warriors, coming off a loss, but had an insane comeback win against Conor Hayes as well last year. Just, one of the comeback wins of the year. Mitchell Goode making his pro debut here, 9-4 as an amateur, 8 wins via submission, which is worth remembering because we're going to talk about something pretty insane. Former middleweight and light heavyweights, Cage Warriors Academy champions, and we had a lot of Academy champs on this card. This fight was interesting because Angus Hewitt dominated for 14 minutes, dominated on the ground, got the fight to the ground whenever he wanted it, and happily played in the guard of Mitchell Goode, who we know is a dangerous submission specialist. Angus Hewitt, no mug on the ground, black belt as well, was getting his licks in and was doing brilliantly. Very impressed of Hewitt throughout the fight. To play in Goode's guard like he did through 2 rounds is really commendable. Goode tried everything off his back. Round 1 had a buggy choke attempt. Round 2 had a buggy choke attempt and kept attacking the neck to try and build back to his feet, which was good. In round 3, Hewitt managed to get Goode down with 3.5 minutes to work. Goode tried to use the fence to sweep Hewitt, didn't manage to get it. Big elbow from Hewitt, I think, opened up Goode's back at some point. Hewitt tried to go for the palm-to-palm rear naked choke, lost the position, and it felt like he was going to ride into the sunset, 30-27, with a very clear and dominant decision over a really fun prospect in Mitchell Goode making his pro debut. But Mitchell Goode failed the buggy choke in round 1, failed the buggy choke in round 2, but in round 3, with 30 seconds left of the fight, Hewitt tried to transition to side control and effectively got locked up in a buggy choke. The first buggy choke in Cage Warriors history, which is absolutely insane. This isn't a young promotion. This organization has been going on for very, very long. But Mitchell Goode scoring the first one in Cage Warriors history. A pro debut for the ages, being down 2 rounds, being 30 seconds away from defeat, and then winning via one of the most improbable and unlikely submissions to pull off in a cage. Mitchell Goode, just hats off to him, and hats off to Brad Wharton on commentary with the don't blame it on the sunshine, don't blame it on the moonlight, don't blame it on the good times, blame it on the buggy. Amazing line, an amazing reaction as well from the commentary team. Strauss as well going mental, which you know he would because of the grappling. But Mitchell Goode is a fucking problem on the ground. I know he won't be happy with how the fight played out, but to pull it out of the bag like that, you've got to be pretty proud. Angus Hewitt, 1-3 now, and I had a comment from J Middle Scheme on Twitter who said, "Is it safe to say Angus Hewitt has had the funniest MMA run of all time? 4 fights deep, and every fight has been insane." Yeah, I mean, probably the funnest MMA run, to be honest. It's been a crazy one for Angus Hewitt. Obviously had the DQ loss due to the illegal knee last time out. Had the massive comeback win against Conor Hayes. Got absolutely slumped by Paddy McCrory with a flying knee in his pro debut, and then loses via buggy choke. I mean, if James is absolutely on the money here with his comment. I think every fight has definitely been insane for Angus Hewitt. He probably won't be happy with it to be 1-3, but he's been competitive in all the fights apart from the McCrory one. And, in this one, he was 30 seconds away from the victory. I think just keep booking this guy because clearly whenever he fights, we're going to see some shit that is going to blow our minds. A really fun fighter is Angus Hewitt, but Mitchell Goode, I'm sure we're going to see him again soon, and I cannot wait to see him in action again at 185 pounds. I think this guy's going to be a problem on the ground for a lot of people. We had a quick one between Ermil Shaferi and Aaron Johnson. Shaferi went to war with Simone Patrizi in Cage Warriors last year, which was his debut. Lost via knockout in round 3, but left a good impression. Aaron Johnson 0-2 in the yellow gloves. Bit of a veteran in the UK MMA scene. Fun grappler. Sneaky good striking. Emil Shaferi, this was his first fight with GB Top Team, I believe. And I'm sure they'll be delighted with his performance because halfway through round 1, Shaferi times the takedown beautifully, circles to the back, applies the rear naked choke and draws a submission out of Aaron Johnson. Quick work for the Albanian, who improves to 5-1-1, gets his first win in the yellow gloves. Obviously, this one was at a catch weight of 160, but Shaferi is good fun, and I think under GB Top Team is going to develop really well. One of the fights I was most excited for on this card was Amir Malekpour versus Tom Creasey, and I'm happy to say it didn't disappoint. Anyone unaware of these two guys, Malekpour was on my shortlist for Newcomer of the Year last year, and I think I mentioned it on the End of Year Awards show. Beat Florian Doschka in his debut, which is fine enough, but then really shocked the European MMA scene with his first round submission win over Dylan Hazan, who was 9-1 coming into that fight. Only seen the scorecard once in 8 pro fights, did Amir Malekpour, but in this one saw the scorecard for the second time. Tom Creasey made his Cage Warriors debut last year. He's obviously the brother of Sam Creasey, handily beat Ander Sanchez. So coming into this one, you had 6-2 versus 5-1, and it was a great fight. First round was a bit slow. I scored it 10-9 to Creasey, and Malekpour was sticking the jab and chewing up the lead leg of his calf kick, but Creasey dominating proceedings on the ground, was throwing quite a bit. And yeah, just I thought really controlled and dominated that round. Malekpour did his best work with less than a minute to go. Like I said, the jab, the calf kick, both guys jabbing together, which was sick. Creasey was connecting probably the crisper strikes in that round. In round 2, it felt like Creasey's leg was starting to get chewed up a little bit too much. The lead leg, he wasn't really checking many of them. And it also got to the point that once he started checking them, you know, if you've been kicked in the leg enough times, by the time that leg is gone, checking it hurts. Like, it's going to hurt either way. Creasey snuck in a nice uppercut and Malekpour pumped him with a double jab. Malekpour did great work in this round. The calf kick wobbling Creasey at one point. Both guys started to look laboured towards the end of the round and big shots were landing. I scored that one 10-9 to Malekpour, which had us 19-19 going into the third. And the third round is one of the rounds of the year. Both guys completely gassed out coming into it. But my word, Creasey tried to shoot for the takedown and Malekpour was having none of it. And he just found a second wind like throughout this round. Unlike anything you've seen, started to dig some lovely strikes to the body, left hook, right hook to the body, looking like a next-gen MMA guy. Head kick as well in there. Creasey ate it. Started working the body even more and just breaking Creasey down. Creasey looked like he was done at one point, but managed to get a short uppercut under Malekpour's left hook. The boys were just scrapping. Malekpour's volume just overwhelmed Creasey. Both guys were depleted, but Malekpour was adjusting well, sticking his jab instead of trying to throw bombs until he landed a massive right hand over the top. Started swarming Creasey against defensive strikes to the body. Creasey wasn't defending, smartly. I think he was just completely depleted. I think if there wasn't like 10 seconds left in the round during that sequence, and with the fight about to end, I think referee probably would have stepped in, but he let Creasey go out on his shield really, and Creasey was effectively saved by the bell. 29-27 Malekpour for me gave him the 10-8 in round 3. I think at 125 pounds, Malekpour is definitely next in line for gold. In my opinion, I think if Kavanagh doesn't get the shot, and I don't believe that he will, because I believe he'll get the call to the UFC. Kavanagh doesn't get the shot, I'd love to see Malekpour versus Shaj. Malekpour's a beast, 7-2 now. Never in a dull fight, even when it goes to scorecards, which is rare. This guy's always in a scrap. Very, very impressive performance from Amir Malekpour. We'll rattle through what's left of the prelims. Tommy Brunning versus Kevin Simone Cesari. Tommy Brunning, super prospect, champ in the Cage Warriors Academy scene. Had the featherweight belt and the bantamweight belt. This was his pro debut against Cesari, who lost in his Cage Warriors debut last year against Leon Arms. What do we know about Tommy Brunning? Guy's a brute on the ground, an absolute beast on the ground. They don't call him Big Tings for no reason. And it was a big win for Big Tings because halfway through round one, got Cesari down. Well, he got him down with his first action of the fight, but halfway through the round, just started smashing away at Cesari in full mount, getting busy with the massive strikes. 1-0 now as a pro. Like I said, a big win for him. Shades of Kalen Loughran in the way he fights, so keep an eye out for him. I reckon they'll book him on that Newcastle card. I know Ian Dean tweeted that he was still matchmaking for it. Love to see Tommy Brunning in there again ASAP. And yeah, just one to keep an eye on, I think, at £135. Speaking of keeping an eye on fighters, Shaun Fraser versus Tarek Pell was a tough one for me because I'm a big fan of both. And I've been following both since the Cage Warriors Academy days, which weren't that long ago, to be honest, because they're both fairly newly turned pros. Shaun Fraser 1-0 coming into this fight. Tarek Pell 3-0 coming into this fight. Obviously, Tarek Pell coming off a 24-second KO in his pro debut for Cage Warriors last year. Shaun Fraser making his pro Cage Warriors debut here. Both former Cage Warriors Academy champs. Shaun Fraser at welterweight, Tarek Pell at lightweight, and this fight was at lightweight. This one went the full 3 rounds. Obviously, like I said, I'm a big fan of both, so it did hurt to see Tarek Pell lose, because yeah, that's a fighter I hold in really high regard. But Shaun Fraser, the guy's a problem at 155 pounds, guys. Another GB top team prospect, a beast on the ground. And listen, Tarek Pell's a really good grappler, and Shaun Fraser did very, very well controlling him on the ground, and doing his best work on the mat. In the second round, came close to finishing Pell. Actually, one thing I loved in this fight was Fraser catching the kick and then sweeping Pell to the ground. Just gorgeous technique. But the leaping left hook from Fraser, the elbow, the uppercut, had Pell hurt against the fence. Slick combination, ended with a head kick at the end of it. Fortuitous, really, for Pell to, after that head kick, to kind of land on top of Fraser. I think that the fight could well have been on its way to ending as a knockout for Fraser. And I think he'll be a bit gutted that he didn't get it against such a massive prospect in Tarek Pell. But I think, I tweeted this after the fight, I think we'll see these guys fight again in the future, because I do hold them both in high regard, and I think they're both set for pretty big things. So it's inevitable that at some point again at 155, we'll see those two guys scrapping. But I scored it 29-28 for Fraser. I thought Pell took round 3, in all honesty. Did really well to kind of find a second win. Spinning back elbow, big right hand. Had Fraser a little bit dazed. But again, Fraser getting the takedown, kept Pell on the mat. Very, very impressive performance. Another big one for GB Top Team. If you want to see the best knockout of the night, by the way, go and watch Mariusz Mikolajewski versus Joshua Onwardi. I thought Onwardi was going to come into this and surprise a lot of people. A guy I really rate despite being 4-4, riding a 2-fight win streak, and he's fought some killers. Imagine having 8 fights in your career and you've already fought James Hendon, Leon Hill, Emil Brown, Michael Pagani, and Tom Mearns, like 5 of 8 against absolute, like an absolute murderer's row of fighters. Former Cage Warriors lightweight academy champion is Onwardi, but Mikolajewski, amazing amateur career, wins over Ben Petches-Kelly and Nathan Lambert, making his pro debut here. Not a great deal to talk about in round 1. Onwardi just dominated him on the ground, and it felt like Onwardi was well on his way to getting a dominant decision win. But Mariusz, this guy is a problem. And you saw it, he was stalking early, threatening with the kicks up the middle. Strikes up the middle were beautiful from him. And he was succeeding in backing Onwardi up. And he backed him up enough that a big flying knee slumped Onwardi. And I mean slumped him. An absolutely insane finish. And what a way to make a professional debut. That's unforgettable stuff for Mariusz Mikolajewski. I don't know what's next for him at 170 pounds, but I will be there for whatever fight this man has, because the way he finished that fight, and even you can tell he's slick on the feet. But the way he finished that fight was stunning, and yeah, hats off to him, because that was a tremendous knockout win. And the first prelim fight of the card, which is the last fight that we'll talk about, was one of my favourite prospects, Jawany Scott versus Jean Matos. Jawany Scott, another GB top team guy. GB top team went 4-0 on the night, and yeah, just had a field day, really. Jawany Scott, undefeated as an amateur, of 8 wins and 1 draw, and some big wins as an amateur in Cage Warriors, including a win over Lona Kavanagh, which wasn't in the Cage Warriors Academy circuit. It was for another promotion, which I can't remember, but he has a win over Lona Kavanagh, making his pro Cage Warriors debut here, but 3-1 as a pro coming into this anyways, but his first fight for the organization. Jean Matos, a relative unknown, 2-0 as a pro, no amateur career, both wins via finish, fighting out of Brazil. Jawany Scott, first round, incredibly bizarre. I don't know what was going on, but he was slipping all over the canvas, and I worried that maybe the canvas wasn't fit for the fights. But knowing Cage Warriors as well as I do, knowing all the inspections that they do, I knew it had to be something else. And John Matos was fine, but even with all the slipping, you could see Scott was putting hands on John Matos, but every time that he slipped, I genuinely worried for his safety. And even in between rounds, going into round 2, I was tweeting to I forget who I was talking to, one of the Irish MMA media guys, and I really did worry for Jawany Scott's safety, because any slip, it could end with, you falling head first into the fence, cutting yourself. You could, roll your ankle, break your leg. I don't know, like, anything can happen, right? Those mats are really rough on the feet, and for someone to be slipping, something's got to be up. And I thought maybe it was the calf kick early from Jean Matos in round 1, but it was just very weird. But in between rounds, they wiped down the soles of the feet of Jawany Scott, and yeah, within a minute of round 2 starting, Jawany Scott had his finish, dropped Matos with a crisp right hand, picked him up and slammed him, sunk his 2 hooks in on the ground, rolled Matos onto his back, belly down rear naked choke, forced Matos to tap. Just a brilliant win for him. Big prospect at 125, and Cage Warriors are building a mad flyweight division at the moment. Jawany Scott improves to 4-1 as a pro. GB top team go 4-0 on the night. A big one for them and a big one for him. I'm sure we'll see him again in the yellow gloves this year. And there you have it. That was Cage Warriors 169 at the Indigo. One of my favourite cards of this year. I know we haven't had many, but I think it will go down as one of the best cards of the year. A lot of finishes, a lot of prospects doing crazy things. It's always good to see cards stacked with the academy guys. As someone who follows the academy stuff, it's good to see these guys get their shot on the big stage. But this coming weekend, we've got another card, so back-to-back cards for Cage Warriors. Cage Warriors 170, and it's a big one in Dublin. You got the return of Paul Hughes. You got a title fight between James Sheehan, Jimbo Slice, versus Daniel Conrad at 170 pounds. Adam Shelley's on this card. You got Deki Makalina and Takamandu versus Rory Evans, which, I'm all over that. Solomon Simon's back in action. Jer Harris, who's a madman. Luca Barando, Scott Pedersen's going to be mental. Ryan Shelley's also here. It's going to be a mad one in Dublin. I cannot wait to talk to you guys about that card and chat about it. But if you've been listening this long, please drop a like, share the podcast on socials, do all that good stuff. Like I always say, we're the only pod. This is a one-man show. We're the only pod that, covers solely Cage Warriors. Other pods do it, but they cover other stuff. This is really just a labor of love. I don't really make a penny out of this, so it's really just me enjoying talking about fights in the UK MMA scene. So if you want to do a nice deed, share the podcast far and wide, do what you can, some nice feedback, or even some constructive feedback to improve. But we like nice stuff over here, so you can chuck me a like, you can chuck me some good feedback. It would be massively appreciated. Other than that, I will catch you all after Cage Warriors 170, Sheehan versus Conrad in Dublin.